प्रेजेंटेड बाय Ebix कैश। हर खुशी के लिए काफी है।
Hello and welcome to this Business Today Market Special. I'm Udayan Mukherjee. With me is my co-host Abha Bakaya and our guest for the show today, Vetri Subramaniam, Chief Investment Officer of UTI AMC. Vetri has been a very successful fund manager for several decades, more than 2 decades, and he runs nearly 1 lakh crores of equity money at UTI. Vetri, it's good to see you again and thank you very much for joining us on the show today. This week it's all about digital, because there's the Paytm IPO and there is so much excitement in the run up to that, and Nykaa after that. So, with all this going around in the digital space, how are you, an old-time fund manager, aligning yourself to these new kind of companies which are coming up? What's your approach?
Well, Udayan, the fun thing about this is that every few years you always have a new set of companies come to the market. And of course, they bring their own paraphernalia, they bring their own, sort of terms that they want you to understand. But the good thing, as we've seen so many of these cycles, and I've certainly seen quite a few, is that eventually it comes down to some, basic fundamentals in terms of the company's ability to generate cash flow, in terms of its ability to eventually generate a, healthy return on capital employed. So I think as long as you're able to take all those new terminologies that they throw at you and convert it back into the terms that we are most familiar with, it's a process of evolution. And we'll continue learning some new tricks as well. But I think if you can connect it back to the basics, which is what all investing should be, then it's not so difficult. I think the bigger challenge, Udayan, is not so much the new terminology. It's really to do with the fact that today in some of these businesses and their, sort of equally evolving business models, we are having to look way out into the future to, sort of ascertain the value of these business franchises today. And I think, therefore, our thought process is really to tread lightly, to proceed with caution, not to ignore these new business models, but to sort of take very pint-sized bets and to take them only in a limited number of names. I think the rest we'll just continue to learn along the way in terms of, how these business models actually scale up. But I would say go back to the basics. The terminology is irrelevant. Eventually, it's all about cash flow and return on capital.
It's an interesting point that you make, because I was just talking to the chairman of one of the largest financial services companies in India, and he made exactly the same point, that while the excitement is great, many of these are actually distributors who will not end up making a lot of money because they don't manufacture the product. They're getting together a lot of people on their platform and maybe distributing some products to them. But do you share that view, or in that sense, would you be skeptical that once the excitement of private equity capital has played out, many of these in 5 years' time would actually not be generating the kind of cash which you need to sustain valuations?
I think without doubt, Udayan, that is a significant risk. I also think we'll have to, keep two sort of thought processes at play simultaneously. One is that there are certain businesses that have perhaps technology didn't exist to enable them 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or 7 years ago. But today the technology enables those business models, and they are creating or delivering something of value to the consumer. I think as you move towards the fintech side of it, is where I think it starts to get slightly more challenging, because you can see the fact that they're creating a lot more touch points with consumers. But what is not clear to us over there is that where does the value of that consumer or customer actually lie? And I think what we are seeing gradually evolving here, Udayan, is that in the fintech space in particular, eventually, in my opinion, it goes back to the ability of the financial entity in terms of its capital base, in terms of the cost of its liabilities, to be able to manage risk well. I think too many fintechs are, coming or looking at this business model as something where they've got the customer contact and tomorrow they can leverage it into lending businesses. And the history of everything that I've seen, going back to, in fact, all the way back to the mid 90s, Udayan, when you had the first flush of NBFCs come to the market, is that being able to access customers and raise liabilities is not enough. You've really got to be able to be competitive in terms of the cost of your liabilities, which means you need a strong liability franchise. And that's much, much harder to get as compared to getting the customer touch point. Maybe some of these business models will also have to become partnership models. We've seen one or two companies go down that route, clearly saying that we can originate the customers, but we don't have the liability franchise, we don't have the credit models to lend to them or take that degree of risk, and therefore we'll partner with them. So we'll have to see how this model, sort of plays out going ahead.
But let me flip the question around. I mean, how do you see the incumbents from the financial landscape responding to this? I mean, it's one thing for the fintechs to come and say, we don't have the product, so let me get into a partnership and offer the product, make some money out of it. But what do you think will be the response of the incumbent players? I mean, what can an HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, even SBI, Bajaj Finance not do what a fintech can do?
So I think, honestly, Udayan, and I think the regulators say as much, there is a little bit of regulatory arbitrage over here, because the minute you think about it in terms of being as a bank, the bars are much higher in terms of what the regulator expects you to do in terms of safeguards, customer liabilities, so on and so forth. And the bar is much lower for some of these fintechs because they come at it more from ease of use rather than the RBI norms which would apply to a banking entity. To my mind, I think the RBI is conversant with this. We've actually seen one of the RBI deputy governors talk about this and make the point that there is a need for both entities to coexist, but eventually the ability of the banks to have the recourse to customer liabilities, to RBI as a lender of last resort, and deliver what they call the intertemporal ability, because people deposit money at one time, they need the money at other time, and that's the most valuable function that a financial entity delivers. And I think that's something that the banks will always stay at the forefront. As you know, Udayan, you'd remember during the GFC time, even entities like mutual funds who don't really borrow money, even we had troubles where the industry then had to rely on certain special lines made available by RBI through the banks. So I think that is eventually the fortress of the banks, the regulatory support that they get. And I think the regulators will also start to intervene gradually if they think that these fintechs are trying to take away profitability but not really play a responsible role. And maybe what we saw with Alibaba in China last year was, in a sense, a trailer that regulators are waking up to this risk, and there has to be a more equal sharing of costs and risk between the fintechs and those with the balance sheet.
Vetri, I wanted to also get a sense from you on the kind of upturn we've seen in the earnings cycle, the confidence that seems to be revving the economy right now, and how everyone continues to ride on this overwhelming momentum. Is there something that you expect will continue? Is it time to taper expectations? Any clouds on the horizon?
So that's an interesting question, Abha. And when I think about it, one of the unusual outcomes we've had, and if I go back 18 months ago, this is not something I would have expected, which is if you look at India's GDP for the year ended March 20, right? It first declines in the year ended March 21. It then recovers in the year ended March 22. But if we were to index it to a base level of 100, over a 2-year period, GDP is actually unchanged because it declines and then recovers to 100. But what has come as a complete unexpected surprise that I don't think any of us could have forecast, and anyway, I'm not particularly good at forecasting, is that over that same 2-year period, corporate profits, if you look at something like the Nifty 50, would actually go up by 45-48%, because in 21 corporate profits went up by about 10-11%, and the current sort of Bloomberg consensus number for 22 is almost a 40% earnings growth. So this sort of a dichotomy of outcome is something that one certainly did not predict or expect when the pandemic hit, but it has happened. I think the challenge really is the economy actually exiting the pandemic in a growth trajectory which is far superior to the growth trajectory we had before the pandemic hit? And that is where I think it gets slightly more challenging. Without doubt, our growth trajectory leading into the pandemic was actually much below potential. But even if we think about exiting at potential 6.5-7% sort of GDP growth rates without inflation creating too much headwinds, it's not clear to me that earnings can actually sustain this kind of a breakneck speed. So you've got a 2-year CAGR between 20 and 22 of maybe 22-24% earnings growth. The risk is that we are extrapolating this outcome into the future because the economy is not perhaps capable of sustaining that. The other point that I would make here, Abha, is that of course, we are aware that, the formal sector, the organized sector has benefited. There's been consolidation. But the equivalent of consolidation, the equivalent of the gains that are being experienced in the formal sector is pain which is being experienced by somebody else in the economy, right? So these are not painless gains. These are actually shifts in market share. These are shifts in incomes which have happened. And that is why I'm a little bit more cautious about extrapolating this 2-year outcome for corporate profit growths into the future. Market valuations are certainly betting that it will persist, and that is without doubt a degree of risk.
What to your mind, Vetri, has led to this kind of a disconnect between earnings growth and economic growth? Is it largely the fact that the organized sector and many large companies have gained market share? Or do you think a large part of that is because of the rise in commodity prices and the extraordinary profits which are accruing to the commodities companies or commodity-based companies within the Nifty or the Sensex? If you look at it in a granular way, which would you say would be it?
Honestly, Udayan, it's not a either or, it's a combination of everything that you said, right? The profitability that the commodity companies experienced. Remember that the cost of the pandemic is showing up in the increase in the government debt to GDP ratio, right? Because you had a 10% fiscal deficit. This year again is a 7%. So you've added 17% to the total debt outstanding of government. But some of that has actually gotten captured in corporate profitability, not necessarily in incomes of every citizen, but certainly in corporate profitability. Now, to my mind, therefore, that is really, the challenge, that this is not really a sustainable rate. So, to go back to the question that you asked, the dichotomy is essentially the fact that the increase in government debt translated into an increase in corporate profitability, not necessarily household incomes. And therefore, the Indian context is slightly different from what happened in the US. Now, for example, if you look at the US, the estimate is that incremental household savings during the last 18 months are almost $2.5 trillion, right? Because these were the handouts which went from government into the hands of households because they made direct fiscal transfers to them. In India, direct fiscal transfers were much smaller, but because of all those points that you made, there was a surge in corporate profitability which got captured by these large companies. Now, the payback for this at some point of time has got to be that government will either have to address the segments of the population that have not benefited from this upsurge in profits, or B, eventually corporate profits will have to make a significant contribution to government tax revenues to ensure that they can get their fiscal house back in order. So that's the balancing part of the equation. Do you get enough growth to give you sustained growth in tax revenues and help pay this increase in debt to GDP that's happened over the last 2 years?
Now, these days, Vetri, when we speak to market participants, we often talk about the prospect of a correction because the market has gone without one for 1.5 years, a meaningful one at any rate. If I had to ask, between these two, the one that you mentioned, the prospect that earnings growth doesn't live up to the kind of lofty expectations that the market seems to be valuing in today, disappointment on that front, or the fact that because of these commodity price issues that we spoke about, inflation goes on the boil, and in the next few months, interest rates start to go up elsewhere in the world and even in India. Which of these two in your book is a bigger trigger for a correction?
So there are two parts to that question, Udayan. One is there a risk that the earnings don't come through? Maybe the 22 earnings will come through, but when I look at the growth estimates out there, even though there are few estimates, 24, 25, people are now presuming that this 15-17% profit growth is the new normal. There are risks to that. But really, the risk is not directly to earnings, but the risk is in the sense that eventually something happens which causes people to realize that, look, these estimates were, overly inflated. It could very well be the inflation that you're pointing to. Though my own sense, and I would tend to give the central banks benefit of doubt here, which is to say that I think some of this inflationary pressure is transient, doesn't mean that inflation goes back to the level it was in 2019-20, but it may be slightly higher, but not at a level where it causes central banks to change trajectory differently compared to what they have already telegraphed to the markets as the speed of tapering or the speed of rate hikes going forward. The biggest risk, as we always know, Udayan, is the things that we don't know that we don't know. Right? The GFC was not something that you and me were aware about before it happened. So I'm sure it will come somewhere from outside this frame. It's something that you and I are not thinking about, and we can't even think about it. But when it comes, it will cause people to do a reality check that, those earnings estimates were only possible when you wear rose-tinted glasses. They're a little bit too difficult. The good news, Udayan, and, one should not lose sight of that, is that I think we have a corporate sector which has now got perhaps the strongest balance sheets that we've seen in a long time. They've deleveraged quite significantly. Interest rates very, very low. So, this should hopefully incentivize both households as well as businesses to go out and invest. And particularly for businesses, these are record low tax rates. And in fact, if you invest in the next 2 to 3 years, remember, you actually get an even lower tax rate than that 25%. So I'd say these are some of the strengths of the underlying equation in terms of the initial conditions. But I do think that valuations have become rich. They are factoring in too much, certainty about growth in the future. And from my perspective as an investor, therefore, I don't really have that margin of safety to go back to that phrase. That is what one is without at the current price level.
But how are you factoring that into your portfolio construction now, Vetri? Which parts of the market are more vulnerable to a correction whenever and for whatever reason it comes about? Which are the ones that you worry more about every night when you look at your portfolio? Sure.
So then, just two points I would make here, and one is sort of got at this over a period of time. The reality is that we didn't know the pandemic was coming. The pandemic happened, and the best risk mitigant that we had against the pandemic was the quality of the stock picking that we had done before the pandemic hit. Right? And that's a discipline that one has always practiced. So our portfolio turnover ratios in most of our schemes were running at 10 to 15% annualized before the pandemic. And even through the pandemic, in fact, in some cases, our portfolio turnover ratio went down even further. So point number one, don't unnecessarily start throwing around stuff in your portfolio because you're trying to hedge against macro risk. The quality of companies in your portfolio sometimes is the best risk mitigant that you have. Trying to go down the, valuation curve to protect yourself sometimes is actually harmful, leave alone counterproductive. The second point that I would make, yes, there are a few pockets of value. We still think, areas, particularly in financials, they've handled this crisis reasonably well. They've preemptively provided, they've, built buffers, and they're likely to benefit from consolidation coming out of this challenge. We think automobiles has been through 3 difficult years, likely to, come out of this looking slightly better, leave alone some of the structural challenges that they face in terms of EV. Where is the risk? We are a little bit concerned in the commodity space. Profitability in some of the commodity spaces has gone back to record levels that we saw, a decade ago. Valuations have become cheaper if I look at the price to earnings multiples, but that's normal, right? Because at peak commodity profits, the P actually compresses. It's the price to book which tells you whether the stocks are expensive. So I would tend to be slightly wary of these valuations in the commodity space. I think those commodity prices are perhaps inflated. Certainly the valuations are inflated when I look at it in terms of the sustainable ROE. Some of the consumer-facing areas, again, these have been rich for a while in India, even pre-pandemic. They've remained rich. They may not have performed in the last 12 months, but they remain rich. That's an area where we, would tend to be slightly nervous again. And finally, I would say, the other sort of area where we've sort of seen valuations expand very dramatically in the last 1 year has been IT. You've seen all the ups and downs of valuation cycles in IT Udayan over the years. But, we've suddenly seen this surge in multiples go from, mid-teens and the 20 level to, 35 and 50 multiples again. I love this sector in terms of the fact that it has produced more globally competitive Indian businesses than any other sector in India. But this valuation inflation gives me a little bit of pause because, I do worry that their sustainable growth rates have not changed. And therefore, this valuation uptick may prove to be a little bit of weight in terms of returns at this point of time.
Vetri, everyone always wants to dig for, more opportunities and gems that you might be observing in the market. So I'm just going to ask you more on that, particularly when it comes to the broader markets and any sub-themes that you feel are emerging.
A lot of new business models, obviously, in this entire tech-enabled space. Many of them are direct to consumer. But as I said, we are also evolving, we are learning. So we are willing to put our foot in the water, but they're not really high conviction bets at this point of time. If I were to break up market cap in terms of large, mid, and small, the valuation challenges, I would say, are most pronounced in the small cap and least pronounced in the large cap. So we see a lot more pockets of value in large cap as compared to what I would generically say is true of the small cap space. And again, in terms of where there is value, I'd point back to some of those sectors. I mentioned auto, I mentioned the banking and financial space. The pharmaceutical healthcare space as well is something that we like. It's mid-cycle in terms of valuation. So those are some of the areas where we see opportunities. I think I find a little bit of the hype about the China plus one strategy a little bit overdone. We've seen tremendous margin expansion in some of those businesses, and we've seen valuations go through the roof. When you see companies at lifetime high margins, lifetime high multiples, for me, that actually tends to raise the warning flag. It may not be a red flag, but certainly a warning flag. High margins, peak P multiples, or peak free cash flow multiples. Take your pick in terms of the multiple you want to look at. Typically, that's orange flag.
Vetri, we are out of time today. Always a pleasure hearing your thoughts. Thank you very much for taking time out today. That's our market special for this week. And from Abha and I, thank you very much for watching. We shall return, of course, next Monday with another voice of wisdom from the market. Till then.